So, do you think there should be an age limit on mortgages? Well, Halifax seem to think so. They're imposing a 70-year age limit on thousands of home buyers in a move to rein in risky lending.
This is going to affect people who are 45 or 50 if they want a 25-year mortgage. This is pretty bad news. Outrageous or a savvy move from the bank? Well, our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, has all the details. He's in our Westminster studio. Liam, am I right? A lot of people now... I bought my first house, I was very lucky when I was 21. These days, people are lucky if they can afford to buy a house sometimes when they're 35, 40. So this age limit could be problematic.
I agree. I was surprised when I saw this from the Halifax. You know, the Halifax tends to has a reputation. It was obviously founded as a mutual rather than a bank, a building society back in the day. It has a reputation for being very customer friendly, a bit less hard-nosed, if you like, than many other commercial lenders. But I agree with you, Andrew. When you have so many youngsters struggling to get on the housing ladder, an age limit on a mortgage does, you know, put the squeeze on. I mean, back in the mid-90s, when I bought my first property, without sounding smug about it, 25 to 34-year-olds, 60% of them owned their own homes. Now 25 to 34-year-olds, it's well under 30%. So a huge swathe now of the UK population at that crucial family-forming age when you get together, you settle down, you have kids. They're not owning their own home. They're in rental accommodation. A lot of them are still living with their parents. It's no wonder our fertility is falling, Andrew. It's no wonder the UK's indigenous, if you like, population is failing to grow because so few kids, a big part of it, so few young adults are able to take the natural step, which for you and me was very natural. We weren't from flashy, wealthy backgrounds, were we, Andrew? Yet it was natural that we would own our own home. That is the British dream. And yet, if you look across the numbers now, the UK population, home ownership in this country is below the average of all the European Union countries combined. So we're not any longer a nation of homeowners the way we were. Home ownership is very high among people aged 60 plus. There are more homes now in the UK that are owned outright with no mortgage than are owned with a mortgage. And people tend to own homes with mortgages when they're younger, of course, because it takes 25 years plus to pay off your mortgage under most circumstances. So it did surprise me that the Halifax had done this. I'm sure they've got good financial reasons.
Why,
but
though,
it does
Liam?
seem to just turn the screw a little bit more on that, you know, what we call generation rent. You know, many young people, even with professional jobs, two young people with degrees and working really hard, really struggling to get on the housing ladder in many, many parts of the country now. This is not just London and the South East.
Why, Liam? What's their logic? We've got to use our imagination in situations like this. Where does this go? Why are Halifax doing this? Because I imagine they're going to be the first of many.
I can only put it down to they must think that there's some kind of financial risk to this. That's the only reason I can come up with. I don't have an insight into their thinking in particular, but looking from the outside, Bev, I think that must be the reason. But look, it strikes me that home ownership, housing as a whole, is it's the dog that hasn't yet barked in British politics. You know, the media talks endlessly about identity politics. The media talks endlessly about foreign policy and wars and so on. And, you know, political gossip and, you know, all these things are important. I'm not denigrating that at all. And, you know, I cover some of that kind of stuff myself. But for so many ordinary people, it's all about, you know, the cost of living. It's all about your housing. Can my kids get a house? Can they buy a house? Can they rent a house? Can they get a social housing from a housing association or a local authority, a council house? We're not really focusing enough on these big issues, in my view, particularly housing. You know, ask people under 35 what really matters to them in politics, and they might talk about the environment. They might talk about other issues of social justice, but they will almost certainly talk about housing. And it strikes me that the government of many, all colours haven't focused on this enough, And it strikes me also that the Halifax, they've made this decision. They seem to be the first to put their head above the parapet. You know, with the best will in the world, I've got a lot of respect for the Halifax. They may get some sort of pushback on this.
OK, all right, thank you, Liam Halligan. A Halifax spokesman has said these changes have been made as part of a regular review of our lending criteria and will ensure we can continue to lend responsibly to a broad range of customers.
It's another attack on older people, isn't it?
Well, it is, but it's also about the fact that there are big funds, big wealth funds and banks are buying houses and then renting them back.
Yeah.
That's what this is about. 2030, you'll owe nothing, you'll be happy. And unfortunately, I don't think people will be happy.
And it's so different, honestly. When I bought my house when I was 21, 22, I mean, the house cost me £19,000.
No.
And you could borrow
tragic.
2.5 times your income, and I had to take a lodger.
Yeah.
But I was able to get my foot on the ladder really young and kept it on that ladder.
Yeah.
Very, very lucky.
It doesn't happen now. And what does that mean? That means you have a generation of young people who feel hopeless. And that is the generation who is sat at home and not going to work. And we talk about them a lot.